Hi, my name is Kiko Denzer. For the past 15 years or so, I've burnt wood to heat home and water and to bake all my bread, all in 4 wood-fired stoves of one kind or another. This shed holds about 4 cords of wood. That should keep the 4 of us here warm, washed, and fed for about 2 years. The reason our wood goes that far is because we burn it hot, fast, and as clean as possible. And then we store as much of that heat as we can before it goes up the chimney. Let's start with ovens. The more I learn about masonry ovens of all kinds, whether you make them out of mud or brick or stone, or whether they're precast or whether they're cheap or expensive, the more I'm convinced that price and design won't make a whit of difference if you don't pay attention to your fuel and if you don't learn to make a clean, hot fire. There are a lot of ways to make fire, but I'm going to show you how I cut my own fuel use in half and my firing times by a third. It's not complicated, but I hope it'll help you understand how to burn clean and hot. Okay, fuel comes first. The drier your wood, the better the fire. How do you store your firewood? Is it covered? Can air circulate through the pile? A lot of folks where I live just throw a tarp over the pile. But not only do those tarps mostly leak, they also trap all the moisture that's in the ground and in the wood itself. So a tarp stack just stays wet or even gets wetter. However, in Western Oregon, even if you have well-stacked, covered, seasoned cordwood, it can have up to 20% water in it. That's about a quart for every 20 pounds of wood. So you wouldn't try to light a fire in the shower. Why would you let your wood make rain in the oven? So for our oven, which we fire up every other week, I take my well-seasoned firewood and I super dry it in the dying heat of the oven, but only after we've baked everything else we want to eat, and only after the temperatures go below about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't want to char the wood, you just want to drive off as much of the water as possible. If you do it hotter, you might end up getting some surprise fires you don't want. So I pack the wood in neatly and I leave the door cracked to let moisture escape. When I come back about 2 weeks later, I have more than enough dry wood for the next burn, and the oven's also had time to dry out. Really dry wood makes a clear ringing sound when you tap 2 pieces together. You might be able to hear it in this video clip. It also splits a lot easier when it's totally dry. The sound of dry wood. That's kiln dried. This is seasoned. So you can hear the water in the wood. After the wood is nice and dry, I split any big stuff into little sticks, most of them no thicker than a finger or two. I do save a couple of the bigger ones for the very bottom of the fire. The idea here, and this is really important, is to lay up the fuel so the fire burns from the top down, like a candle. Candles don't really smoke. That's because candle makers size the wick according to the fuel load. A thick wick for a big candle, a thin wick for a thin candle. A good wick maintains a constant relationship between fuel and flame, so you get a clean, bright flame. That's just what you want in your oven. It's important to remember, though, that you need to fill the oven with flames, not with wood. The fire needs oxygen to burn, but if you fill the oven with wood, there won't be room for oxygen and fuel to mix and get a clean burn. So I lay my fuel in loosely arranged layers with lots of open space, with the big stuff at the bottom and the little stuff at the top. The 2 bigger, longer pieces that I didn't split up, I lay them on the bottom, oriented so air can flow all the way to the back of the oven. On top of those 2 rails, I arrange a layer of smaller sticks like cross ties, and so on until I have about 3 or 4 layers. On top of that, I lay a tiny teepee of fine, dry kindling over a crumpled piece of paper. That's my wick. After I light it, I might add just enough small fuel to make sure it can heat up the stuff below to the ignition point. Then I just stand back and I let it go. So that first pile has enough fuel in it to burn clear and bright for about 20 minutes. After that, I restoke it every 15 minutes or so, adding just enough fresh small fuel for 15 minutes of clean, bright fire. It's really important not to overload it. Otherwise, all that cold fuel smokes a lot and you don't get a good burn. I have 2 doors for my oven. One of them is a baking door, right? Because you want the oven to be hot, and if you leave the door open, all the heat will escape. So I have a wooden baking door that I soak in water while I'm burning the fire. But while I'm burning the fire, I have a metal firing door that just helps to organize incoming air and outgoing smoke and to keep them from getting confused. Since I'm usually trying to do other things around the place at the same time, I actually need to use a timer to remind me to feed the fire, but often the oven is burnt clean in just 30 or 40 minutes. That's 2 loads. When I say the oven is burnt clean, I mean that there's no soot on the inside of the dome. Soot is carbon, and it burns off at about 1200 degrees. So a clean oven has captured enough heat not only to burn off the carbon, but to bake at least a load of bread. So how long you fire your oven will depend on a few different factors. First, how much baking do you want to do? But second, how thick are your oven walls? These days, I recommend that most home ovens need to have no more than 3 inches of dense masonry and as much insulation as possible, both under the hearth and over the dome. The thicker your oven, the more heat it needs in order to fully saturate the mass. And if you don't saturate the mass, it'll pull heat out of the oven instead of putting it in. So an average oven with 3 inches of mass should be able to get good and hot in 2 hours or even less, assuming a good fire with good wood. So here's the review. First, fuel. Well seasoned is essential, but oven dried is not only good, but a good way to use up the final heat of the oven. Second, oxygen. You need a path so cool air can get to the bottom and to the back of the fire. Leave plenty of space for the fuel and air to mix, and don't overload the oven. Too much fuel and not enough oxygen makes a dirty, smoky fire. Think of smoke as unburnt fuel and try to minimize it. If you're just filling the oven with wood, building a little teepee in front, lighting a match, and walking away from the smoke will get you a hot oven, but it could take you 2 or more full loads of fuel and many, many more hours of fire. Plus, the heavier and thicker your oven walls, the more fire it'll take. That's how I started, but after writing a little how-to book on how to make mud ovens, and then printing and shipping thousands of copies, some of them to folks building ovens in Africa, where fuel is scarce, and where the deserts are growing into the forest land, I started worrying about all those ovens, and all that wood, and all that smoke. So I did some experiments. The results of those experiments were pretty stupendous, at least by my lights. Half the wood got the oven just as hot, and instead of 3 hours, it only took me 2. In general, a wood-fired stove or oven isn't just an appliance with a switch. It's a doorway into your relationship with the world. Calling it elemental can't describe how fire asks you to take responsibility. Here, we heat our house with a little rocket stove that only burns a few sticks at a time, but on their way back into the sky, we capture the energy of those sticks in a massive earth and stone bench that not only keeps the heat in our house, but it also provides an extra warm seat for when we need a quick, deep warm-up from outside cold and damp. This heater in my office is made of an old cast-off box stove that worked okay, but most of the heat from the fire went right up the chimney, unless I damped it down to burn slow and dirty. Now, I capture most of that heat in a folded 300-pound masonry channel that keeps me warm twice as long with the same fuel. And I burn it all so hot that you can't see any smoke coming out of the chimney. That means less chimney cleaning for me and less danger of fire in the house. Our hot water comes from this little water jacket built around a little stove that burns hot and fast and gives us a good use for all the wood that's too small for the other stoves. They all work on the same principles: dry fuel, small pieces, which means maximum surface area, plenty of room for fuel and air to mix, and a fast, hot, clean burn. Elemental, yes, because the elements give us food, fuel, comfort, fellowship, and life. Because trees fill the oven with fire, because the fire transforms cold into warm and raw into cooked, because plants and animals give their lives so we can fill our bellies, and because friends and family make work into love made visible. Louis Armstrong said slow motion gets you there faster. It takes time to chop the wood, it takes time to heat the water and cook your food, but you won't have to buy healthy exercise and expensive prepared food, and you'll have something satisfying and worthwhile to do outside under the sun in the sky with your family and friends, and maybe that'll help make it possible for your children's children's children to participate in all those blessings too.